with us regarding SBAC Part 2. I see there's a few familiar faces that were here last week, so I'm hoping it means because it was good information and you kind of want to just recap that. For those of you that this is your first time, I really hope that you get something today to help us with the challenge that is SBAC with the fact that we are doing it remotely. We're joined here today by Dr. Cunningham, so I wanted to give her a moment to welcome everyone.
Thank you so much, Gabe, and good afternoon, everyone. If you haven't been counting yet, there are 43 days of the school year left to go after today. That does not include spring break. So we knew 8 weeks, but I went ahead and counted, and really not counting just like get it over with, counting because we have so much to do in planning for all the summer programs and summer PDs and all of that, and it just feels like time is evasive this year. So 43 days to go. Congratulations to all of you. We made it through this year. Thank you for everything you've done for your students, for working together collectively and learning together. It has definitely been a year of flexibility and a year of learning for both students and adults. I want to thank the Tech TOSAs for putting together PDs throughout the year for us on our Transformational Mondays. Today with SBAC Part 2. I've had a few emails asking me, was Part 1 recorded? And yes, it was. And this one's already being recorded as well. So thank you for being here. We have a lot to learn. So we're going to head back to Gabriel Ward and our Tech TOSAs to get the show on the road. Thank you again.
All right, so we mentioned already we're here for SBAC Part 2. I'm going to get my screen ready so that I can share with you. And I know that what I've said last week is still holds true, is the fact that...
Gabe, can you press record? I don't have rights. I don't know if you're recording already.
It says recording already.
Good.
I'm not sure which of us already did that, but someone beat us to the punch. Thank you so much.
I did.
Thank you, Christina. Gold star for you. Okay, sorry, I was with my presentation. Let me get a second first. Pull that up. Thanks for your patience. Let me get this going. Let's try one more time. Screen share. Okay, so I was saying that I know that it's very much a challenge. So I kind of wanted to do my best to ease everyone's anxiety and frustration. And so I had this meme prepared, and I'll let you take a moment to read that over, just to kind of really get an idea of where, oops, hold on, not that, where we are at today. And so that's just it. I think last week, one of the only questions that someone had filled out on the question doc was with regards to our certain segments of the assessment still open and on. And so I will just share with you what I've heard from Mike. He happens to pop into most of the opportunities when they're meeting to discuss what is the state and where everything kind of stands. And as we know currently, everything is a go in terms of the assessments being mandated. I know that right now there has been a petition, or at least a request from the state to be able to be exempt from the CAASPP, which is the science portion of the state test. As of right now, that has not been approved, meaning what? We have to go in with the belief that we will be assessing ELA, math, and science for those testing grade levels that administer the CAASPP. So just want to make sure everyone understands that is our reality, and it is a challenge. And so hopefully today we'll get something that, whether it's helping you or helping your students, either best prepare or just make sure we're putting our best foot forward so that we can be the most successful we could possibly be. So our goals, what we're really trying to accomplish today are all of these things. And so the first one is we're going to talk about CERS. And I know that was something that was touched upon in SBAC Part 1, but I know that there's some components that maybe weren't addressed. So I want to make sure we really have a strong, solid understanding of CERS. We want to look at tools for teachers. This is a completely new interface. We used to have some opportunities to interact with the digital library, but Tools for Teachers is new this year. We're going to look at some of the blueprints. What are some of the changes or modifications for this current school year? And there are some. We'll take a look at some of the resources you have available to you. and then we'll finish up with some conversations around a performance task. Having said all those goals, it's a lot to get through. I know last week when we were here, it was about an hour and a half. So I just want to make sure we're aware. Whatever you can stick around for, obviously, hopefully you get the most out of it. But we understand if you need to go based on whatever else you might have. The other thing I want to say is this is not necessarily just a sit and listen. There are going to be opportunities for everyone to go into breakout rooms. I know that we have a lot of brilliant minds in the room. And so I want to make sure we have as much opportunity to discuss, to collaborate, to share. So as much as it is an opportunity for you to sit and listen, I do want to make sure you understand the expectation will be for when you go to breakout rooms to have some conversations with colleagues, so you can be able to amplify and maximize all the information we're taking away today. Okay? So thank you so much ahead of time for your contributions and for your engagement. Appreciate that. One of the things I want to touch on before I get into my goals, and so this is, I guess you can add an extra one in there, and that's just to kind of recap a little bit about the assessments, because I know there was some confusion, especially after SBAC Part 1, which is, okay, do all my students have to download this digital browser? And where do I need to go as the teacher? Do I need to download the digital browser? So you just want to make sure you understand that for teachers, all of us, when we administer the actual summative SBAC, or if you've already started with the LPAC, you're going to go to the test administrator interface, and I will show you where to go. That's through CAASPP. So if you're a teacher and you're saying, I'm going to administer this test, do I need to download this browser? No. All of us are going to be going through the test administrator interface, and we'll see firsthand where to go and access that through CAASPP website. For our students, if they are using a district device, when I know there's a large chunk of students that are, if they are using a district device, then they will already have, the district will provide for them, it's already been downloaded, the secure web browser. So we're talking about a small portion of students who are using personal devices. Those would be the students that are expected to be able to install and download the secure browser. So if they're using a district device, they're good to go. Only in the instances where they're using personal devices, and the two devices that were, or at least the two driving main platforms that we're supporting, or at least have videos as well as step-by-step guides, are for Mac devices, as well as for Windows devices or PCs. So if they're trying to use an iPad, or if they're trying to use, for example, a Chromebook, that's not something we're at least really trying to advocate or at least supporting because of the challenges those present. So just wanted to make sure I got that out of the way, because I know there was some confusion with that. All right, so let's go ahead and dig into CERS. What is CERS? I think that's one of the first things we want to talk about. And so CERS is essentially the California version of the reporting system. So every state might have their own version of this. This is ours in California. And so we're talking not only about interim scores, and I don't mean our district necessarily benchmark. What I'm talking about and speaking to is with regards to the CAASPP version. So I know last year, for those, many of us were using the IABs, and maybe this year you might still be using IABs, but those types of data would be reported into the CERS. What else? All of our summative SBAC scores. So we know last year we were exempt, we didn't have the assessment, but go back 2 years ago, you would be able to pull up those scores. You would also be able to look at LPAC results for those of us that are testing of LPAC. So all of these things are basically culminated into CERS, our California Educational Reporting System. That's what we're using. So I want to show you where you can access this. And then the beauty is that some of you may already have your accounts ready to roll, but sometimes you may not. And so there's going to be a platform where you can go and kind of almost like a little playground, if you will, sandbox to fiddle around with other fake data so that you at least familiarize yourself. So before I jump in, I do want to go over a couple of things. First of all, we talked about what's there. Interim scores are one of them. When we talk about interim scores, there's a couple different ways that you could basically go through that. One of the ways is to be able to look at, when you look at your results, is to say student by student. How did this student perform on one of the interim assessment blocks or the IABs? And so you could see student by student. But one of the things that I really recommended and I would encourage you to use more is the results by item. And we'll show you how to go about that. And the reason why I tend to recommend it is because you can get more of a zoomed out approach. And so you can see, for example, as a class, how are my students performing? Maybe they're struggling with this particular item. And so that might be something that warrants me going back over. Maybe it's the way that it was presented to them. So it could be the STEM or the question itself, or maybe it's the content. So just understanding that, yes, well, it's nice to be able to see how did each of our various students perform on this assessment. Sometimes if we went on to see what do I need to revisit or what might necessarily be something that I want to spend more time on, that would be results by item. We'll show you how to look at that. So in addition to the interim assessment block scores, or the IABs, you also see summative scores there. So we talk about SBAC. How are the scores presented? So sometimes I take time to be able to ensure we understand how scores are presented. They're not going to appear to us in terms of standards where we look at and say, oh, this is how a student performed on this standard or that standard. Really, we're looking at it in two manners. First is the overall score. So your students are going to see on a scale of 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, how are they performing overall with regards to either ELA or math, or if they happen to take the CAASPP as well. So that's a 4-point scale. How are they performing? When you look in the CERS, you're going to be able to see that breakdown. The other breakdown is if you want to get into a little bit more of the fine-tuned thing, look of it, that's the claim score. So both ELA as well as mathematics have claim scores, and each of these claims is a more overall approach. How are students performing within this section or this portion of understanding? And so I just want to make sure you understand that if you were looking at it in CERS, and we'll have a moment to look through some sample scores, you should be able to look at both an overall score for the students as well as a claim score for the students. All right, I'm going to stop my screen share for a moment, and then I'm going to pull up my CAASPP so that I can show you where you can go to be able to access CERS. Give me a moment. All right. So this CAASPP site is probably something that we're going to be using quite extensively. So if you haven't already bookmarked it, I would probably encourage you to do so. But essentially, most of what we're going to be able to access, whether it be for test prep or the actual administration itself, or resources related to it, primarily are all accessed through here. So we had said we were looking to look at first CERS. So where could you go? So I'm going to go ahead and click on right here. It says Smarter Balanced Interim Assessments. And this is one way to go about it. And if you scroll down, you can see where it says the California Educator Reporting System, CERS. When you click on this, it's going to prompt you to log in. Now, rather than go through and subject us to see potentially some of our own district scores, we're just going to look, at least right now, at how you may navigate the sandbox system. No, it's going to look slightly different depending upon your level of access. Some of us might be able to see the entire school scores, but most of us are probably going to be limited to the scores of myself. So again, if you have access in a few moments, we'll let you be able to go there. By all means, go to the actual education reporting system, log in with your login credentials. But for the purposes of what I'm going to show you, I'm just going to go ahead and go through here. I know last week we had some teachers saying, my screen looks slightly different. So whether you go to the sandbox or the actual reporting system for our district, for your site, might look slightly different. So this is the sandbox. I'm going to select as if I were an elementary teacher. And then I'm going to select whichever grade I want it to look at. So let's just say we're 4th grade. So one of the things some of the teachers said to us last week when I gave them an opportunity, and you'll have it in a moment, to be able to peruse and familiarize yourself more so with this, is that I gave assessments, but I'm not seeing them here. One of the things I really want to point out is that you understand the year that you're operating under. So from this drop down, you can see the various school years. So if you're not looking under the correct school year, that might be a reason why you don't see whatever you're looking for. So if I were looking for 2021, I might say here, okay, here's the assessment that is selected, but it defaults always to most recent. If you're saying, let's say, for example, I've given several different tests and I have a particular one I'm looking for, you can collect right here where it says select assignments. When you go to select assignments, you're given options of the various assignments or assessments rather that you've actually administered. So again, if you're just saying, this is the only one that gives me the option, it's the default to go to most recent, but if you click on select assignments, you'll be able to select whichever of the one of the tests you want. Now, the other thing I know we've encountered before is sometimes teachers may say, I administered, excuse me, the assessment over the course of a few days, or maybe it was a handful of kids were struggling to get in, so I then started again. Each of these kind of constitutes a different little opportunity where you were giving access or to be able to allow them to start the assessment. So sometimes if you click on this and it says right here, this is for 8 students. But if I click on this one, now both of these are dark and blue. Now I'm looking at the results of 21 students and you can see the dates. So again, you may have administered throughout the course of that date several different chunks, but if you're not seeing all of the results of your students, make sure you selected all from the particular dates that you know that you gave that particular assessment. So now you can see I'm up to 32 students. And so I can scroll down and you're looking at it and you're looking at the results for what did each of these students, and again, this is just photo, these are not real students, and how they performed. And each of these columns can be configured so that you can adjust. So if I, for example, I wanted to look at it as opposed to alphabetical order, I might click this and I could adjust from high to low or vice versa. But this is all looking at students. And I mentioned to you earlier how my preferred route is to look at results by item. So I'm going to go ahead and toggle this drop down to look at this. And now I'm looking at how did my students perform on each of the items of this particular assessment. And so on this one, you might say to yourself, okay, what am I looking at here? I've looked on this far right, I see the 0 and the 1. The 0 is to say % of students that did not answer this item correct, whereas the column with the 1 is to indicate what % of students had gotten it correct. So I'm looking, I'm saying, oh my goodness, my students were really successful with this question. Oh, well, I notice here it says the item difficulty according to CAASPP is easy. Let's continue to see. Or there might be an item here where my students really had a tough time with. And so if this was, say, for example, it were this item, not to say that it was, but if it were, you select on it, and now you can look at how did each of my students perform on item number 5. But if I'm really concerned with how was it presented, simply by clicking on item viewer, now you can see straightforward, how did this item look for my students? Again, we're looking at, is it the way it was presented that maybe they were challenged by, or maybe it's the concept itself that they need to have more practice with. So I think by looking at, again, the results by item, we can really drill down to what my students might require more attention to. And so what I want to do is I'm going to give you probably, we'll say 3 or 4 minutes. I'm going to stop my share. And what I'd like for you to do is peruse the CERS. If you already feel like you're an expert and you've navigated the platform, see if there's anything new, because there have been some changes, just so that we can make sure we're the best prepared with regards to the CERS, our first stepping ground for what our journey today. So go ahead, 3 minutes. Look over the platform. If you don't have long credentials and you can't get in, please take a look at the sandbox we were just looking at. All right, thank you for taking some time. Again, may not have been able to get in to look at everything in the short amount of time allotted, but I'm hoping you at least had some chance to familiarize yourself at the very least of how to access the platform, if not to be able to look at some assignments or some assessments rather that you administer. So what I want to do, and we're going to do this almost at every single juncture, is to be able to give you a chance to go into breakout rooms. So you'll be sent in a few moments. And what I really want us to do is when we look at those breakout rooms is to say, some guiding questions, but we're really trying to help one another out. Maybe some things that you've used that maybe you could help share with colleagues, or maybe some things that you just discovered while you were kind of browsing around the site. So let me go ahead and show you what I wanted you to discuss potentially, and then I'll give you a chance to be able to go to those rooms. So one more time, let me share my screen before I send you away. This is something we didn't address, but I think when we come back, we'll talk about it, which is to understand kind of targets, because it's something I want to make sure I share with you in terms of what CERS has available to you as well. But here's one of the 3 guiding, if you will, questions. I know that when we sometimes get in rooms, we can talk about, just like our students, a plethora of items and topics, but here's the things I'd like you to focus on if you could, which is what did you learn or discover? Again, just a short amount of time, but maybe what did you see when we were going through CERS? Maybe it was something that we just discussed as we went through the very beginning portions of it. How do you plan to use this resource? What are some things you're thinking you might use to be able to maximize and amplify this? And then how have you used it previously? I know that CERS is not brand new this year, so it's quite possible that in the past, how did you or your grade level team go about it? Because not every single site, not every single teacher is going to utilize things the same way, but I know that we can obviously learn from one another. So I'm going to ask that when you go to those breakout rooms that you discuss those 3 items. Just kind of guiding questions, if you will. If there's other things relevant to CERS, if you could talk about that. Note, we'll be able to have break rooms at the various other junctures, but right now our focus is all about the educational reporting system, CERS. Thank you for the conversation. Just 2 things. One, I want to remind you there's a question document that I know Christina had posted. So if you have questions, please, by all means, go ahead and post those there. And then the other thing I wanted to show is to look at the summative scores and one more feature before we move on. So I alluded to, and you had seen my screen prior, where we talked about how there are targets. So when you look at claim data for the summative scores, you may also be able to look at targets. Now, I know that last year wasn't the case, but if you went to 2 years ago, or maybe looking ahead as we look back at this particular assessment next year, we might be able to look at these target scores. And I think this is really helpful to me. So I want to make sure you understand how to access that as well. So let me go ahead and share screen. So I pulled up this, you can see that I changed the school year, and I'm looking at a few years ago, but I wanted to be able to pull up summative test score. And the reason I wanted to be able to do that, of course, this only has one student in this. Let me see if I can change. Oh, this is LPAC. Let's see. I don't think there was an assessment summative for, I don't know if I changed the 5th grade. Let's do that. Select assessments. And now I'm looking to see if there was a assessment. Here we go. So here, just by changing around some of the data in here, I'm looking at now a summative assessment. And reason why I want to pull that up is so as opposed to looking at results by item or results by a student, we also should also have a target report. So again, I'm just configuring where I'm looking at where the results view. And so now I'm looking at by target. So this is only going to be the case for when you talk about summative assessments, whether it be summative ELA or summative math. And I think the power is to be able to say, okay, now I can see what are some of my student strengths. I know in some cases, assessments are a challenge. And so maybe you may have several things where your students are performing below the where we would like for them to be at in terms of their score, right? They're below a score level of a 3 on the summative assessment. However, some of the things you might see is to say, okay, let's look at this one. All right, I understand that my students didn't meet where the benchmark is for here. However, in relationship to the other standards or the other targets, and that's really what they are, they're segments, I can see that my students perform better on this portion. And so I might be able to say, okay, what were we doing to be able to support students so that they, maybe even though they're not getting it, that maybe we can say this is something of a positive, right? So they did better on this section as opposed to the other. So when you talk about target scores, you're getting a more fine tooth, the closest you might be able to get in terms of when we talk about standards, the targets are the closest you're going to be able to get to that. And I'll go back to the presentation so that you can see why. And that's because when we talk about what targets are, they're a more refined version of this handful or cluster, if you will, of standards. That's what the target is representative of. So I just wanted to make sure I share with you that in the CERS reporting system, in addition to accessing the summative scores, looking at claim data, in addition to looking at the item, IAB, the interim assessment blocks, you also have the ability for the summative SBACs at least to drill down to the target. And I think that once I discovered that, I said that might be something worthy of sharing out. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about, which you maybe have already done, maybe you didn't see, let me get back to that screen. And that's to look at, over here. So I'm going to go back. Let's see, that assessment. Go to grade 4. And where are the assessments are at? So let's say I was looking at, okay, I gave a practice test, or I gave one of these interim assessment blocks. Let me go ahead and click on one of these ones. Look at that. And now I'm looking at this particular assessment. And the reason I wanted to point that out to you is here you have where it says instructional resources. So I'm looking right now at the results of one of the interim assessment blocks. And because this is just a fake little sandbox here, I only have the results of one student. That's not the point. What I want to show you here is this blue button. And it's going to be the case of any one of the assessment blocks or interim assessment blocks you administer. You can click on this. And what it redirects you to is it redirects you to our new tools for teachers. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this. And it's prompting me to sign in. Okay. So you are going to have access to what they call, and this is what give me a moment to sign in and I'll show you. They have this thing called the connections playlist. If you're familiar at all with the digital library, they had essentially the same thing, but I will say this is far more useful and practical. Essentially what they're saying is that there are certain, I thought I'd say about this, But there are certain things you might do with your students depending upon how they perform on this, in this case, this particular IAB. There it is, I did saved. So this is tools for teachers, and that's what we're going to run through next. But I did want to show you, and I don't know why that particular one didn't play out. Let's just see if I can try it one more time. Of course, this particular resource isn't available. I must have selected a bad one, but I'll go ahead and pull up right here for a connection playlist so you can see what I'm talking about. Each of the IABs, or each of the inter-assessment blocks that CAASPP gives us, they provide for us one of what they call the connection playlist. And the connection playlist, I don't know why I didn't pull it up here. Let me just type in 3rd grade. Here we go, interim connection playlist. This one happens to be for the research inter-assessment block for English language arts. You can see underneath there, there's one for math. I'm gonna click on this one and show you so you can understand what I'm talking about. So it says, based on if our students perform below, near, or above, and that's the 3 tiers you're gonna get the options in terms of the results for the IABs. To the left of us, here are some of the things you might do. And these are all vetted and created by teachers. I know that this is a new site, Tools for Teachers. So there have been a lot of pooling and making sure that these are the highest level of resources. And I haven't seen every single one, but from what I have seen, they do seem that they're pretty extensive. And that before we wrap up, before I move on to the next interface, the next option, I want to make sure I run through, here are the components for each one of these lessons. They call them the instructional resources. So if I were to click any one of these things here, let's go ahead and click on this one. It's always going to have that same format, which I'll run through before we run away. But again, here's a lesson. It tells you when to get started. They tell you the directions in terms of as the teacher, if you wanted to use it. And at the very end, if there's anything you need to download to be able to utilize this. So this is the Tools for Teachers interface. Let me go and go back to our presentation and just touch on a few components of it. So as you saw me really fast right there, I was able to search. You can literally pull up your grade level. You can find all the resources that are there. You can pull up any particular item. Let's say, for example, I'm teaching math and my students are having a difficult time with fill in the blank, whatever it might be. You'll find resources that are there. And so the search window gives you that option. You have the option to filter. That's one of the other options there. You can click on it. You can see right here where it says filter resources. From there, you can be able to disaggregate. Maybe I only want science lessons, or maybe I only want particular things that fall underneath this category, things of performance tasks, for example. So you can filter your results very extensively by clicking on that, or again, you could just use the search. One of the things we talk about how Tools for Teachers is new, primarily intended for testing grade levels. However, they do have some things for kinder, first, and second. And so if you have any colleagues that maybe are working with regards to science, what they've tried to do is they've tried to instill some of the science lessons, because we know that everything builds when we talk about our students and they take the CAASPP in 5th grade. It's made up of the things that they're going to have learned throughout the course of their elementary years. And so there's only, I want to say, either 20 or 21 lessons currently for science, but that's something that science is currently meeting right now to be able to see this upcoming summer if they can develop additional resources. But I did want to share that you do have some science resources in addition to ELA and math. And so the breakdown for the most part is in elementary, they have science resources, writing resources, reading resources, ELA components, as well as math. But when we talk about 6-12, that's when you're going to only be having those two, whether it be ELA or math, in terms of what the resources are available to you. So rather than me being able to kind of go through a little bit more with this, I want to give you, just like we did for the CERS, a few minutes to be able to go to Tools for Teachers. Now, you saw me go about it one way. Maybe you don't want to have to go through CERS to be able to access it. So let me show you another option. You could go to SBAC, and SBAC, we're going to probably do a couple times things there. So let me go ahead and just Google SBAC. And so now I'm here in the Smarter Balance. Remember, SBAC is across the country, so each state is slightly different and unique, which is why we use CAASPP. I'm going to select my location. And now that I've selected California, here are all of the things that it gives me. Now, one of the big things, as I mentioned to you already, the CAASPP assessment portal or CAASPP site, which we've been to. But if I scroll down a bit, you can see where it says right here, tools for teachers. You will need login credentials for that. Speaking of login credentials, I will say a teacher earlier when we were talking about the CERS said they didn't feel that they had the account necessary. And so I said, if you don't have the proper account, please make sure you're emailing your test site coordinator. In addition to that, you might want to CC both your administrator as well as Mike Mead, and we can make sure that they go through the necessary steps to get you an account. And so that you, whether it's you administering the assessment or at least just making sure you can be able to access scores from previous assessments. So again, I want to encourage you, if you don't have an active account, how you can go about that. So what I would like for you to do for the next 3 minutes or so, or 4 minutes probably, is please play around in Tools for Teachers. This is a completely new interface. So while some of you may say to yourself, well, you know, I've seen before the previous rendition of this. This is not the same thing as the digital library. Far, far superior. Please take a few minutes to be able to familiarize yourself with Tools for Teachers. I know that you obviously in a short amount of time were able to see everything, but hopefully you were able to at least take a moment to see some things. I want to share just a couple of things before I send you to a breakout room to discuss those two things. One of which is I mentioned I wanted to share the overall structure because I think it's important, just like we teach our students text structure, for us to understand what is the structure of all of these resources I'm going to be given. And I do want to show you as well how you could further filter, as I alluded to earlier. So let me go ahead and share screen. I'll pull that up and show those two items before we send you to breakout rooms. So here, when I'm on Tools for Teachers, one of the things you have is the ability to filter, as I mentioned. So I'm going to click on where it says go to the filter. Give it a moment to hopefully load. And then here you can easily see how I can adjust what I'm given. So these are the different types of resources they have. Some of which are mostly referred to as the instruction resources. I think of those as lessons. So if it's a lesson or something I could do with my students, it's an instructional resource. If it's a connection playlist, this is where it houses, and it says, based on how your students performed on this block or this chunk of concepts, here are some things you might do to support them depending upon wherever they are at. Those are these connection playlists, and I had already shown you one example of that. Professional learning and formative assessment, this is more so resources for us as teachers. Now, I haven't seen all of them, but of the few that I have taken the time to dig through, I think that they're somewhat valuable. I know that in mathematics, one of the strategies or structures we shared about is the 3 reads protocol. And here they break down how the 3 reads protocol works. So again, just understanding more so resources for us as the teacher as opposed to lessons. Grades, you get it. You just select whatever grades you're wanting, and then a limit. Here are all the things only for that particular grade level. As I mentioned to you, science, when we talk about K1-2, are the only resources that I've found thus far for those lower grade non-testing grade levels. I'm going to go on and eliminate that, but let's just say, for example, I was teaching 7th grade. Click on 7th, and I say, oh, okay, well, what do I want? Maybe I'm teaching ELA. And now here are the different, if I wanted to drill down to the claims, what you have. Every time you click on one of these little filters, obviously you're going to get less below because you've kind of weeded through, if you will, whatever you're not wanting to find. Now I'm going to go ahead and click on any one of these. This is an instructional resource. Remember, the instructional resources are lessons, and I want to break down, like I mentioned to you, that structure. So you're always going to get, no matter whether it's mathematics, science, ELA, this at the top where it says get started. And this is kind of where it tells you as a teacher, here's what it is. Now I mentioned to you, these are all new. So you can even tells you what date they've been updated. Almost everything I've seen in here has been either 2020 or 2021 in terms of when this has been here. And I know Tools for Teachers is new, but I'm telling you all of these resources are newly created or at least just newly added here. So most of the stuff here you'll find is worth your while, I will say. So step by step, here it breaks down as a teacher, each of the things you're going to do. So first you do this, then you do this. And I think it really helps us understand where they're coming from for whatever they're wanting us to do. I'm going to scroll down. Sometimes there's an attachment, sometimes there's not. But anything you need something, they're going to include that here in this portion. Most of these assignments, thankfully, they're trying to take into consideration accessibility. We sometimes have students that fall underneath this particular group, and because of that, they need additional supports. Here, if there's anything that students would benefit from or need additional, they have this section called accessibility strategies. And then I really like these last couple areas, things to consider. And this is great because they've done this lesson before. Here are some of the things that they have, some insights to help us. So these things to consider. And then this just talks about the formative assessment process, which we know is huge. We always want to kind of get an idea of where students are at currently so we can meet them where they're at. So by and large, the same structure as I mentioned to you is going to be on every single instructional resource, every lesson, if you will. And I want to make sure I kind of ran over that with you. One of the things I think was helpful for me was if I find something and I'm like, that's really good, I like that, you can come to the top where you have a little bookmark and you can bookmark that so that when I come here, I don't have to go back through the process to find whatever I may want. So if I bookmarked it, where would it go? I could email it, of course, send it to myself or print it out, bookmark in notes, and I can see, look, here are some of the things that I said I want to come back to. In this case, it was another assignment I found, and this one I recently bookmarked. Okay, so there's one last thing I do want to share. I said it was 2, but here's 3 actually, and then I'll give you a chance to go into breakout rooms to discuss, to say, what did you find that was new? How might you use this with your students? And the last thing I wanted to touch on, which is up here. Let's see, I want to say it was the, I think it was just the fact that you can quickly access some of these various things through here. Oh no, it was the item portal. And that's because with the item portal, what you're basically saying is, I want to see what were the specific items, these are the questions, that were on any one of the interim assessment blocks. So from here, you could see any, let's say, for example, I'm teaching 5th grade, and I know it was the math test, and it was a particular item that my students had a tough section on. Maybe it was this IED. So what I'm really doing is finding each of the questions that were a part of the various interim assessment blocks. So for every one of your grade levels, you could see firsthand the items themselves, item by item. So let's just say it was that one. And you can click on this, and now you're looking at what was the item of that particular assessment. So just another way that you might use this to be able to help your students if it was something maybe they struggled with, or maybe it's a concept that, hey, this is what we're working on this upcoming week. Let's see if there's anything here that I might use to be able to use it as like a problem of the day or problem of the week with your students. So I just wanted to make sure I showed you that. So we're going to stop my share. Rather than kind of talk about how maybe you use this resource, we're going to send you to a breakout room, but really we're just looking at what did you learn, and also focus on how you might use this with your students, or how you could see yourself using this. So what did you learn and how could you see yourself using this? So when you go to the breakout room, if you could do your best to keep your conversation centered around tools for teachers, and what did you find and how could you see yourself using this with your students moving forward? Tools for Teachers is a newer resource, and while I do believe that it is very helpful, some of it may not be as helpful at the current moment, but hopefully at least you familiarize yourself and understand moving forward how you could use this potentially. All right, that said, I want to get back into what we have. All right, so that's to just briefly talk about the CAASPP and the CAA. Again, I said earlier that this is the one assessment currently that looks as though it's the possibility of us not being required to assess. Not to say that things couldn't change, but for at least that's the only one that right now we're waiting for the state of California to grant us the waiver so that we don't need to assess. But because it hasn't been granted, moving forward with the assumption we will. And so having said that, understanding that there are, I'm not sure what happened with the formatting there, but essentially you have these resources of constructed responses. We're going to look at both how you could use that potentially for ELA mathematics, but this is new for science. And so what they have essentially is for these testing grade levels, grades 5, grades 8 in high school, they have student sample responses. So what does it look like for a student to get a score of blank? Let's just say it's a 2-point constructed response and a student wrote their answer. What does it look like for a student that scored a 2 or 1 or a 0? And so these, I think, could be invaluable if we're working with preparing our students for the CAASPP. And so I wanted to make sure that you were aware of this newer resource. Essentially, you could Google search it and find it, of course, but you could basically go down through the resources in CAASPP. I don't plan to show you, although if you'd like, let me know and I can walk you through how you could find these annotated responses. And this is basically looking at the practice test and how you could see for the practice test, what are the students responding and what's the score that they're being given based on their response. What I want us to be able to move through next is really to ELA and math. And so one of the biggest things we talk about every year, there are these blueprints, and the blueprints are just to tell us how many items are going to be devoted to each of these sections, right? Or each of these portions. So one of the biggest things is that for 2021, the test has been significantly modified, and I'll show you what I mean. The test has been shortened, right? And so I just pulled this up, not to say we're going to concern ourselves with the time, but I did look to make sure what they said is true. I think the biggest way for us to see that is here. So when you look at for ELA, this is going back prior to this school year. You can see if I look at reading and I go across and I'm saying, okay, look at the far right column. The far right column is to tell me for reading, there are going to be between 14 to 16 questions for claim 1 of ELA. I could do the same for writing. There's will be about 9 questions and so on and so on. But if we look at what's the current new version for 2021, which has been modified, you can see. Hold on, let me go back to that one more time. Let's try this again. The new version, you can see in the upper right corner. Earlier, we saw significantly more. Now we're looking at 10 items for ELA for claim 1, and the same thing for writing. So again, I wanted you to see firsthand that the assessment has been adjusted or reduced, and that's for the CAT. And so when I talk about the CAT, I'm talking about the computer adaptive portion of the test. When you think about SBAC, really it's comprised of 2 portions. We have the computer adaptive, which most of us are familiar with. You know, our students are sitting on the computer. Sometimes it's broken up into 2 days, maybe it's 1 day, and our students are going through and by and large selected response. They're selecting their answers or dragging and moving things around, of course. But when you talk about the other aspect, which is performance task, that is different claims. And so those have not been adjusted or amended for this upcoming year. So you're saying the test is shorter? Yes. For the CAT, the test has been reduced for this year for both ELA and math. So I just showed you right there how you could see for what it was for, this is 6.8. The first one I showed you was 3.5. Let's go ahead and take a look. There's grade 11. I have all of these, and I do want to make sure I share with you. And I will show you where you can find this. All of the resources I'm sharing in terms of these blueprints, things like that, you have it all housed in one folder, and you could easily access that, and I'll show you where to do that. Here's for math, so we're shifting gears away from ELA. This is 3.5 overall. Again, looking at the items here. For claim 1, 17 to 20 items were going to be assessed for that particular portion, and just so you can see real quick, now it's taken it down to 10 items for that first one. So what has been changed for 2021 is the computer adaptive portion, significantly less items. What has not been changed, at least not yet, has been the performance task. So whenever you look and you say, let's look at mathematics, here, well, where are the most of the performance task claims? When we look at what are they talking about? It's going to come from claims 2 through 4. So when we talk about most of claim 1, which is your concept and procedures, you can see that that isn't part of the performance task. So I just want to make sure we understand, if the CAT portion, if we're talking about math, if CAT is the one that's changed, what is not being changed is the performance task. That's where I would probably say we really want to concern ourselves, which is why I've created for you some mathematics resources, and I want to make sure you understand if your ELA still has shared. She was here last week, and so she wasn't able to join us today, but I have a portion of the video clip from last week's training that I will share in a moment, and to kind of go over some performance task stuff. Because again, performance tasks aren't changed. That's where we felt like we might be able to support and help people better understand and get ready for the test itself. All right, so that's 3.5. Here's 6.8. There's not a significant amount of change, but I do want to make sure you understood. The CAD's been adjusted, thankfully. Here's for high school. All right. So I thought maybe we could go to breakout rooms, but we are running a little bit behind schedule. So I will just say this. Hopefully you were able to see how the assessment itself has changed. I'll take this moment to briefly show you where you can access that resource before we move on to our next talking point, which is talking about performance tasks and the resources. So let me go ahead and show you where you could go. If you're not already aware, we have created this informational links webpage where basically all of the many resources that are here, I have it bookmarked. Let me go and pull it up. So this is hopefully you've seen this before, and these are all of the links to the videos and resources we've compiled. I'm going to scroll down, and the reason I'm scrolling down is because where I housed it, where it says at the very bottom of this document, SBAC CAASPP resources 2021, when you click on that, you'll be able to see some of the resources that I just shared, in addition to others that I'll touch upon in a moment. So we already went through CERS. Here's the informational user guide for that. How to start a session. I know some people in the breakout room were talking about, well, how are you going to do this with our students? I will walk you through this, but understand there's a document for that. A portion of what we are going to touch upon today is right here. But if you were looking at, let's say, the specific right here, adjusted blueprints, here they are. So if I click on this document here, I can see here's the 2021 adjusted ELA we just showed you, blueprints, and you could see from your grade 3.5 or your grade span 6.8, or if you were high school, here's where you could access that document. So if you really wanted to see where do I need to focus my instruction, or at least what should I emphasize to see how much weight is being carried upon these various sections. So the blueprints, and I will say, when I was trying to find them, I had a tough time. I had read that they were adjusted, but actually finding them itself, there was a lot of links that were taking me to the older version. So just make sure if you're not going this route that you are looking at the modified for 2021 blueprints. So let me go ahead and step away from that. Oops, not the right tab. Let's come back here. And that's to be able to say, I want to focus, I told you about performance tasks, but I want to make sure we understand kind of the various things. You have at your disposal as a teacher in preparation for SBAC, a couple of different things you could use. One of which are the sample items. And I will show you how to access that, but essentially sample items are just that. They're you looking at one item. Earlier, I had showed you how to look at the interim assessment block items. Sample items is really kind of almost, if you will, released items. It's, hey, these might have been questions that were on a previous version of the test, but this is exactly what SBAC is gonna look like. These are not the exact same items that will be tested on this year, but they're just that, they're sample items. So you can filter that resource by looking at your grade level, by looking at your content area, and even your claim if you wanted to go that far drilled down. They even have the targets if you wanted to filter out that. In addition to sample items, I'll show you where to get that, is the practice test. And this is the big deal that I really want to encourage you, if you haven't done it, that you will do it. And that's to say, this version of SBAC, because it's remote, is not the same as what they've taken before. There are some different technological barriers or technological challenges potentially for our students. And we want to make sure we iron out those kinks as early as possible, because it would not be ideal for them on the actual day of the summit of SBAC for them to encounter some of these potential issues. So the practice test is really, really what I encourage all of us to use. Now, there's different ways to do it. Maybe you've done the practice test in the past, but what makes this year's practice test different is how, and you'll see in a moment, how students are going to need to be able to allow it access to not only their web camera, but access to the recording. Because if you've already done the LPAC, you know there are certain communication widgets or certain communication features inside of SBAC itself for the summative test. So here's what I want to make sure we understand. So if you're scheduling a test, right, it's going to ask you, is this in person or hybrid? And because we're going to be using the SBAC summative, so even though I'm talking about practice tests, this is very much identical to the summative test. So you're going to get the option to select, am I in person or am I remote or hybrid? In this case, we're hybrid. What's the next step? Then we're going to be able to go through and say, am I going to allow access? And so your students are going to need to do something comparable, but essentially you are saying, I allow access to my microphone and to my camera. Okay, I agree. Next. When your students sign into the practice test, most of us, even myself as well, we're just using this as a simply guessing guess. So we would go ahead and click sign in. We don't need to enter any information. What Mike has said that the state of California is advocating, is encouraging us to do, is to not use this as a guess. Rather, for us to be able to toggle where it says guest user off and guest session off, so that students are prompted to be able to use their SSID as well as the session ID that you will provide them. So again, yes, it's a practice test, but we're encouraging you, as is the state, to be able to have your students sign in as if they were taking a real test. Now the difference is they're not going through the secure web browser. So because students aren't using the secure web browser, we're not stuck with, hey, they can't have Zoom on, hey, they can't do this, because the secure browser limits what people can do when the secure browser is open. But if we're going through and doing this, let's say, for example, synchronously, maybe it's through class time, okay? Well, if we go through this practice route, my students are kind of getting that same experience in that they're having to log in with their SSID, they're having to enter a session ID, and as a teacher, I'm still going to grant them access to be able to allow them to start the test. But all of this is good practice not only for the students, but for us as well. And then it will ask us, of course, just like our students, is this you? The students would say yes. And then they're going to have to wait for the approval. If you've ever administered an IEB or the summative SBAC, you know as a teacher that you're going to wait for your students as they populate and you're approving them either one by one or in batches to be able to start the assessment. And so essentially we're walking you through what it looks like. I will show you as well on the website, but I wanted to at least walk you through this aspect of it. Here's the one of the big differences, and that's to talk about the video camera. Your students are going to have to give access to their webcam to be able to be controlled by CAASPP so that they can see them. And that doesn't mean that it's going to see them constantly, but if you were going to enter into a conversation to support your students, they would be able to be there. But the goal is really to make sure that they're not doing things they shouldn't be doing while taking the test. So they say, I see myself, and move on. They have to be able to check the recording. If they're going to speak to you during the assessment, they're going to be on there to be able to use their microphone. So just like we use our mic for, our camera, students are going to have to be able to grant permission to use their microphone as well. One of the things the teacher last week when we met was talking about, well, like, so what if I have like multiple cameras? Can I do that? And so one of the things that recommended from CAASPP has been, and I've read through the documents myself, they say, please tell your students to turn off the camera if you're doing this over Zoom or Google Meets or however you're meeting with your students. Why would you turn off your camera during the meeting or in this case, Zoom? Well, that's because you want the camera to be activated here to be utilized for CAASPP. So you can't have your camera doing both platforms. So if you turn off the cameras synchronously, let's say during class, right? Then of course it could pick up my camera here. I would still be able to talk to my teacher and speak to, provide that support. It's just we wouldn't be able to see synchronously over Zoom because again, your camera is being controlled by here. So I just want to make sure I point that out because that is a question that popped up last week. Here, we're all familiar with this. This is, can you hear my sound? One of the things I think some students, because I had the pleasure of being able to go in and do some lessons, and students were getting stuck here because they were saying, I click play, I can hear the sound, why not? Well, so you have to scroll down. Sometimes it has to scroll down to say I can play the sound, and then eventually click continue. But that's something that they most likely had seen before. And then text to speech. This is for some of those cases where they need to be able to hear whatever they're listening to. Now, these last two widgets, I really want to make sure we at least hammer home. For those of you that have done the LPAC, you have familiarity and experience, and we have heard that there were a lot of issues. Mike told me that the district was working very, very much so to be able to resolve those. And to my understanding, they fixed a lot of the things. If there were certain issues you were experiencing with LPAC, I'm sure hopefully you're in communication with Mike to be able to troubleshoot, or if not, NCS. But here are the two main remote widgets that they refer to. One is the hand, and the other one is a little message icon. And I put these little two if-thens because I want to make sure you understand. If a student clicks on raise their hand during the assessment itself, you as the teacher will know because of the fact that it's going to pop up on your test administrator interface, okay? So you're going to see that they basically need some support of some kind, right? Maybe you can message them. You might be able to enter a video conference with them, right, if they need be. Then the other option is, what if they don't raising their hand? What if they're just sending me messages? Because just like we have a chat box in Zoom, in here, they're given an opportunity to send you a message. So they can send you, not each other, but you as the examiner, the test administrator, a message. And so for you as a teacher, something is not going to pop up to basically show that they're having difficulty. As they phrase it, a test with potential issues. That's going to only pop up if they raise their hand. But you will still see that there's a message, and you would be able to respond to that message if it comes to you based on a student. So again, students have those two different remote widgets that they can reach out to you as the teacher for support. So I want to show you where I'm encouraging you to go. So let me go ahead and open a new tab right here. This is CAASPP. I'll go back to this. So if you are in CAASPP, which we mentioned you are probably going to utilize a lot, if you haven't already bookmarked it, please do so. From the CAASPP site, you have where it says practice and training test. This would be for your students. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this. Now, because it knows who I am, I'm going to open this in a incognito window, which basically means it's as if it doesn't know who I am. And I'm seeing where it says guest user, it's on. And I could easily sign in, as I mentioned to you, but we really want to make sure our students are getting practice to be able to go through and sign in. So I'm going to toggle that off. And by doing so, students now have to enter their first name and their social ID, just like if they were taking the summative SBAC. Where it says guest session, toggle that off, and they're going to enter the session ID that you as the teacher provide them. And then they could sign in just like they would for the actual summative SBAC. But again, how did I do this? Close this again. I had my students, and this is where your students would go for the practice and training test. Click on that. And we are saying to toggle both those things off so that they're trying to mimic what it is like for the real test. Now, what about you as the teacher? That's not where you would go. That's where your students would go to take the test. You have a couple options. You could click right here where it says Test Administrator Interface for all online tests. Or if you happen to go to interim assessments, you also have that same button. Either way, you're looking for the button that says Test Administrator Interface for all online tests. And when I click on that, it's going to have me log in. This is the same login credentials that I used earlier. Now, mine looks slightly different, but you're looking for where it says Start a New Session. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Now, this is for all tests. What I mean by that is, if you wanted to do a practice test, like I hope you do, or this is the same place you would go for the actual summative SBAC. So you can see where it says Smarter Balance Summative Assessments. It's not where we're going, but rather we're looking at some practice tests. So I'm going to click on Smarter Balance Interim Assessments. Here are the IABs and the ICAs. What do I mean? This would be a block, a chunk of data, and this would be comprehensive. This will be the very closest to the real test. So if you really wanted to say, I want to give my kid the exact replica of almost what they're going to look like for the summative, then you would do the ICA. And you have the ICA for both ELA and math. If I click on Expand or Plus, you can see the options that are here. I would probably say I encourage most people to do the blocks. And the reason being, there's significantly less questions. Where the ICA is going to be closer to 30, the IABs are going to be more often closer to 15. Obviously, some assessments have slightly more and some slightly less, but around 15. So almost in half, if you will, of the blocks. Now, the blocks, if you are familiar with previous years, we had those as our district benchmarks or our district interim assessments. That was not the case this year, but in previous years, or last year at least, we did. So I'm going to click on, let's just say ELA, you find your grade level, and whichever one of the IEBs you might want to give. And so let's just say, for example, I want to do the brief rights. Are you sure this is what you want to use? Yes, I'm sure. And then at the bottom, you can see over here where it says, is this in-person or remote or hybrid? Now, I mentioned to you, we are doing it this route, so we're going to click remote or hybrid. My video is currently on with you through Zoom, so it's not going to allow me to pick up my actual camera, although I just wanted to make sure you could see the process. So let me see if I can go ahead and say, stop my video for a moment. And then it says, how do I want to do this? Non-standardized or standardized? If you're not sure, I will tell you the distinction. Standardized is more so for formal assessment. So if it were a district benchmark, then it would be standardized. If it were, for example, something specific that your site has maybe requested that everyone do, then I would say standardized. But if you're just doing this as practice, non-standardized, that is the default. I'm going to click on OK. And it says, if your students will use a secure browser, please share this session ID with them. And you can see on the side over here, I'm going to go and close that. Here's where it's saying, do we want to give you access to my webcam as a teacher? I agree, and I'm going to allow it. And it's going to be able to say, ooh, in the top right corner, this wants to use my camera. I'm going to click allow it. And I would go through that process for not only my camera, but as well as my microphone. Let me go ahead and stop that right there. But essentially, again, I wanted to make sure I walked you through so that you understood. This is how you would do the summative SBAC, but we are asking teachers to do it. In fact, I believe the state is recommending you to do the practice test twice. One time they say, do it synchronously so that you can troubleshoot and support your students, of course, over Zoom or however you're meeting with your students. And then they said, have your students do it again, maybe as an independent assignment so that they can do it without the support of you. So that's what the state is advocating or recommending, at least to do it 2 times. I'm hoping everyone will at least go through it once with their students so that they ensure that they can get on. They ensure that they can be able to utilize the widgets so that they know what it looks like to be able to test remotely. Let me go ahead and get back to what I wanted to touch on. We just went through all of the remaining widgets and all of the opportunities to see how to administer the SBAC. I wanted to do a breakout room, and so maybe we'll just do maybe like a 3-minute room real fast to talk about what did you learn to discover and how you plan to use this. So it won't be very long. We'll say maybe only like 3 minutes, and then we'll come back and wrap up with performance tasks. But again, a few minutes to join a breakout room so that you can talk about with a colleague, hopefully how you might utilize this.
All right, let me bookmark it then. I didn't bookmark it yet, so let me bookmark it.
Thank you to those of you who stuck around. We have two last things, which is just to talk about performance tasks. So I have a clip from Sil. She was here last week, and she walks us. Yeah, still Joe. And she walks us through what she's doing with her, or what she's done rather, with her students to prepare them for the writing aspect, constructive response, right, of the performance task. She's made some folders in Canvas. I will say, if you are interested, now she's teaching 3rd grade. She's in the classroom this year. She's teaching 3rd grade. So what she can share are her 3rd grade resources she's compiled. However, if you're teaching other grades, maybe you teach 4th, 5th, or middle school, or whatever, and you're going to be administering, you could take that, what she shares with you, if you'd like, and then you could configure it to make it work for you. But if you are teaching 3rd grade level, might be a quick little take. Just send either her an email, or you could send it to me and I can forward it to her, whichever you prefer. But she's kind enough to join us. Let me go ahead and play that, and then I'll share some math resources we've compiled as well.
Hello, everybody. I just want to, hi, everyone. Gabriel asked me to just share what I've been using in the classroom. So mine's more application. I know you've been learning a lot about the logistics and how to get on and all of the information that you need to access CAASPP. It's a lot of information. So what Gabriel provided is definitely helpful. And I do recommend going over that. And Mike Mead has been sending those emails with the videos, links, and all of that. So definitely you have to watch it. I watched it multiple times and still trying to grasp everything that I need. This year I'm teaching 3rd grade. So what I'm going to share is more, it's definitely my 3rd grade class and what I've been doing with my 3rd grade students. But you can modify it for 4th and 5th. Possibly in the middle schools also, you might be able to use it because I'm going to just share what I've done in my class to prepare my kids for the performance task. Performance task is not changing. It's still there, even in the shortened version. So what I've done is, because I kept thinking through, okay, if I was in the classroom, I would be showing them different examples of passages that they could read and then taking them through the writing process. But what I did was, trying to think through what do my kids need and in what chunks could I give it to them. So when I broke it up into my Canvas assignments, it ended up being about 8 to 10 days worth of lessons. And there were different chunks of assignments. I just want to show you how it looks on my Canvas. And I even have some videos of my students who submitted some assignments to me. So could I share my screen? Am I able to? Let's see. Okay, can you see that? All right, so this is what I use still. This is what I shared with teachers when I was training teachers in the past on how to get some resources from the current curriculum on performance tasks. There is a sample in your IABs also on CAASPP, but I usually use that at the very end when it's closer to CAASPP time, and I'll do it as a mock performance task. Now, but I want to go through the whole process with the kids from beginning to end. So this is the book that I use, and this is, in our Wonders curriculum. It's available actually from 2nd grade all the way to 6th grade. So if you teach middle school, you might be able to use some of it. If you need help accessing it, the tech tosters know how to access the other grade levels. There's an open account where you can access all grade level material, and this would come up in your Wonders curriculum up to 6th grade. So this is a 3rd grade version. I also use 2nd grade version in my class because I just want to expose them to as many samples as possible. So what I did on my Canvas in my Canvas course, I created a module, and of course the kids would not see it this way in 3rd grade. I have each of the assignments in the daily assignments, but I wanted to show you how I broke it up for them. So this one is one of the assignments that I gave to them. So I basically took a screenshot of the task and read it through with my students. And then there was an assignment for them to do. Basically read the student directions and complete the assignment. So at the very bottom, they have to let me know what type of writing text type is this and what do you need to do for part 1. So this is like just a little warm up that I did with them, going through what a performance task will look like. Then after that, we went to the sources. And so one of the things that we did in the classroom was also, reading and taking notes. using the first, last, first strategy. So I would talk to the kids about how the first sentence is usually what the main idea is of the paragraph. So I have the kids, we do it together. This was the first time. The one that we did for opinion writing was the first full exposure from beginning to end in a performance task. So we took the notes together, and then I just had them show it to me in a video. So a lot of my assignments are submitted through video. So they would show me the page and then explain what their notes was saying, what their notes were. So that was one. So we did that for source 1, source 2, and source 3, because there was 3 sources. And then we went into reading the task 2, part 2 of the performance task, reading through that together and finding what we need to do. Again, that would probably, when we were reading the source 1, 2, 3, that took 1 day per source. So definitely we did take our time to do it because we're 3rd grade. It's the first time the students are being tested. So it did take a little longer. Of course, in the upper grades, I think it could go a little faster. Then we review the writing organizer. So this was something that they've done before because we've done opinion writing before. So we just reviewed it and we said, okay, what does an opinion writing need to have? And the kids are working through what the organizer needs to include. So this was, now this topic was about dog-friendly parks and whether they should have dogs leashed or unleashed. So after I did this with them, we would go, so this is the general organizer for the writing for opinion. And then we filled one out together using the information in our sources, and we did one for unleashed and wrote down our opinions and the reasons. And then we did one for leashed because, you know, the sources that we had were for both. So then we wrote our notes for that. And then at the end of the lessons, again, probably around day 8 is when they were able to choose which one they would take to full essay. So they had to tell me in one of the assignments, are you going to choose unleashed or leashed? And that was basically the assignment there. But before they get to actual writing in 3rd grade, we do a lot of oral language practice. So after we did those notes, what I had the kids do was to submit different assignments to me on Canvas. So I want to show you an example. So this one, and I did everything in small, tiny chunks. So for example, this one was when they had to tell me the topic sentence and they had to tell me the big idea for each box. So let me show you one of the students that submitted. So he's showing me his organizer and then he's gonna read through.
I'll fix the sound in just a moment.
There's no audio here.
You might need to share sound.
Okay, you definitely have to hear the
Hold on, Jake.
There we go.
And I show you this.
So
And I can read right
we
now.
just took the notes and they have to come up with the sentence.
Dog-friendly parks, having unleashed dogs is good for the community. For reason, for number 1, more fun. For number 2, more exercise. For 3, helps people.
Okay. So as you saw, it was just the main topic sentence is what I wanted them to be able to tell me. And again, they just had notes. They didn't have the sentence written down. You know, we're trying to teach kids that language and written language can be fluid, and we have to make sure that they feel like they can experiment with different sentence structures. So I had them do a lot of oral language practice with their sentences. So that was one of the first assignments where they had to submit a sentence structure. And then after that, you know, we went through the other sections of the organizer. So I made a little video of myself giving them an example of how they would read their organizer. So let me see, let me show you one of these where it's a little bit more developed. So she was going through, so she's doing the same thing, but telling me orally what her sentences would be.
In my neighborhood, dog-friendly parks should be unleashed.
To begin, it's more fun. In addition, you and your dog get more exercise. Lastly, it helps people too.
Okay, so again, step by step. The first one, that the boy that you saw, he just read the main idea words, and then now she's developing, the next day it was developing the sentence using some of that. And then the following day was also now, continuing to work on our notes. Then they were able to develop all 3 boxes in the organizer and orally be able to tell it in the video. So let me see if there's one I can show on here. And again, it was all step by step. So I think, definitely this is taking it very slowly, but for kids in 3rd grade, that's what they needed. So here she's, I'm gonna fast forward a little bit.
Community should let dog-friendly parks let dogs be unleashed. To begin, unleashed dogs should have more fun and have sense of humor, and it'll be interesting for them, and they can explore parts of the park. Also, unleashed dogs could have more exercise. They can play with other dogs, run around, explore and climb, and explore parts that the owners can't. Finally, unleashed dogs can help people. Let the owners sit and relax, talk to each other, and know others while the dog is having fun.
Okay, so again, just going through our notes and having them practice orally. That part actually has been more beneficial actually being online, because in the classroom I had a hard time being able to listen to everybody's, and their sentences. So it's been actually very nice for me to have them record their responses and put it onto their assignment. So and so after taking them through all of those steps, then I had them do the final draft, and it was on a Google Doc. So after they submitted their first draft, then I was able to give feedback to them, and then continue to work on the draft to add, whatever they needed to improve it. So, it is a long process to go through the performance task, because I kept thinking, how do I do this virtually? How do I go through the steps that they need in a distance learning situation? Especially writing, it is very difficult because you can't see right there what they're doing. So this is how I ended up doing it. It broke it up, and again, about 8 to 10 days of assignments, but in small little chunks. So I have it for, I did that for opinion. I did it for the narrative also. We went through the process. And then the third one that I still need to do this month is the informational. And then after that, we'll bring it all together and make sure that the kids know what to include for the 3 different genres, because we don't know what genre they'll be receiving. So, any questions?
So thank you, those of you that were able to sit through that. Hopefully there was something you were able to glean. This is my second time seeing Sil, and there was bits that I picked up that I hadn't picked up before. So she's amazing, and we truly miss her, but it's hopefully something there that you might be able to use with your students. And that's just it. We don't know how the performance task is going to look specifically for ELA and writing, and what genre they're going to be asked to write to. The last component I just want to share is the math resources. There are some new things that I put in there for performance tasks, because that's what I want to focus on. So let me just show you where to access those, and we'll wrap up. So you could go to the math website, would probably be the easiest route. And if you forgot how to get there, I can show you. I don't need sound for this. But essentially, just like before, you would go to where it says SBAC support. So I'm on the math website. I'm going to SBAC support. With some new things I put on there, but we're focused on performance tasks. So where I look at, it says performance task here, and it says SBAC sample performance tasks. So I'm going to click on this. Now, I know Sil had used the curriculum as her guide to be able to help her come up with those resources. I use the practice performance tasks that are available through CAASPP. So let's just say I'm teaching 4th grade. If I open 4th grade folder, here are all the very many examples of performance tasks from the state. So one's Art Day, one's Lemonade. What I did is I took and made it a PowerPoint presentation, because I'm envisioning how could I create something that a teacher just might take and use with their students. So I made this performance task PowerPoint, and here essentially how it's set up, whether you're teaching in third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, they're going to pretty much look the same. There are middle school versions, look slightly different, but the resources is for the most part the same. This just walks you through as a student, what is a performance task? You got to start there. They may not understand what it is. It talks about, let's try one. And then it shows them where to go to get there. It shows them which is the performance task we're looking at. Again, this resource is from the state's practice performance task. It walks them through the things they're going to have to click to be able to kind of get in. And then this is where I think the most power is. When we talk about our constructed response portions of the math test, at least performance task, the first two questions are ramping up, but then as it gets more into the constructed response, here's what they really want to see. And so I'm trying to get kids to use because I know how important it is for them to be able to back up with support for their responses. We want them to use words and numbers. And then we also want to make sure they address all parts. Sometimes students would answer phenomenally an aspect of the question, but not all aspects of the question. So understanding that for students, this is what we kind of want to hit. And I did do these lessons in a few third grade classrooms because I can't just make something and say, use this unless I've tried it. And so I did make some tweaks thereafter, but by and large, I felt like it was somewhat successful. Here where it says, let's score some sample student answers. This just talks about for students, let's put on the teacher hat. Let's see what it looks like to see other people's responses. So yes, they did it. Now let's look at what other people have answered. So we can say, okay, here's what one student wrote. Not you, not any of your classmates, but let's see what they did. They wrote this. Do you think they deserve 0 points, 1 point, or 2 points? And I did show them the rubric so they could see what it kind of means and broke it down for them. And then we asked them, maybe they wrote it in the chat, or maybe they actually did with their fingers, or however they're going to respond and let us know. Kind of like a chance. Kids like to, they like to be harsh to one another and grade each other roughly. But then at the end of the day, we come back and say, okay, why do you think it only deserves 1 point? Or why do you think it deserves 2 points? What did this student do to warrant that score? And then we looked at, here's what SBAC said, not what Mr. Ward said, not what your teacher said, but from the state, here's what they think the scores were, and here's why. So after we walk through students for each of those, usually there's 2 constructed responses per performance task, sometimes 3. Then at the end after that, I said, okay, take your answer, whatever you already did. Maybe you think you deserve a 1, or maybe you think you already deserve a 2 because your response is so amazing. How could you amplify and make it even better? So I think the power isn't so much in just seeing what other people do, but to see what it takes to get a 2. Because the reality is in math, by and large, we're not just talking about is the answer correct. Sometimes they're looking at the math claims and how the students respond to determine whether or not they get the full score. So just making sure we understand this is here for you as a teacher, regardless of the grade level you're teaching. Again, it's the same process when you look at the other, this is the other constructed response. Different question, here's what it looks like, and then we look at what students said, and then what score they actually warranted. And then we summed up by really hitting home these last 2 things. Please make sure when you are answering these questions, using words and numbers when possible, and then of course, answer all the parts of the question, because if you don't, you're not gonna get the max score. So again, this is just a resource. Where is it housed? In the math website underneath SBAC support. There are other things that are here that I would say are helpful, but because performance task, and that's why I pointed out when had still joined us, performance task is unchanged. How can we make sure we maximize given that information? So I'll stop my share there. I know there's some questions. Thank you, Christina. You put in the chat the link to the math website. I appreciate that. So I'm going to look at the question doc, but I'll open it up. I know that there's a handful of you that stuck around. Thank you. It's a lot of information that has been thrown our way. But I just want to make sure we touch on what was our goals for today and did we address them. So here they are. We talked about we were going to recap CERS, which we did. We talked about how we were going to look at tools for teachers. We had a chance to play around there. We looked at the blueprints, what's been changed, how the test has been shortened. We looked at some resources for you as the teacher, and then we finished up with our performance task conversations. So I hope you felt like we covered and addressed everything we set forth. Want to make sure, like I said, answer some questions you might have, if any.
And this is to get the recordings. I haven't looked at one recording this year. So to get the recordings.
I'll put that in the chat with a link, but essentially you could go to bit.ly HLPUSD links, but I'll put it in the chat to make it even easier for you.
Thanks.
Of course. And so any of the recordings from previous sessions, this one included, will be there.
All right, perfect. Anyone use the studio? Anyone else use the studio? I use it at the very beginning of the year and haven't used it since. Anybody use the studio regularly and videos regularly or Flipgrid regularly?
We in third grade at my school, we were using Flipgrid, and we were using also like the Canvas video recording, and we just kept on having like a lot of students like having troubles accessing it or not being able to turn in like their videos, because we did Canvas for the first couple of weeks, and then after that we transitioned to Flipgrid, and then students were still having issues there, so then we just kind of stopped using that as an assignment, like having students record themselves because of the technical glitches. We kind of gave up on that.
I had students, my students, even in that one assignment, I just could not get everybody to even get on the video. And pretty soon it edged out from video to just voice to just out.
Joey, we've had issues. Canvas is aware of the issue where students were having, they weren't able to add the recordings. They have fixed that. Actually, they're pushing the new fix this weekend. And now next to file upload, the kids are going to have a button that says webcam recording where they can just click and do it. And we'll make a video on that and we'll cover that for sure. But it was a glitch that Canvas found and they have fixed it.
So how okay, maybe this is really off topic. Next year, are we keeping Canvas next year? I assume yes. I'm using all this next year. So I'm using all this next year. All right. Canvas, Zoom, how about Zoom? You hear about Zoom? Because I asked my admin about Zoom. I'm gonna get somebody in trouble right now. Zoom, anybody? Somebody give me something so I can say, well, I heard this.
Someone asked that. Someone asked that question from your department today on email, and I'm gonna bring it up at our meeting tomorrow. Yeah.
Okay. I know who it was. All right.
I can show you what I was talking about. So next to upload, going back to the video, next to upload file, now our students are going to have something that says use webcam, and it has been fixed. And the fix comes at 3:20. So I think it's this weekend, hopefully. So we'll see how that looks. Yeah.
Okay. And as far as, this is really again off topic. Next week, I wanted to see if we could possibly, I'll talk to Ricardo. I'll talk to Gabe and Ricardo. I'll talk to y'all. Whichever
Thank
one
you for asking questions. Anyone else have any other questions? Oh, sorry, cut you off, Dior. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. Whichever one of the toasts, I will stick around and All right.
Anyone else have anything we could try to assist with? No? All right. Well, thank you so much for taking time. And like I said, I know it was a lot of information and we went longer even than I had planned. But hopefully you got something to take and help you with the daunting task that is SBAC. And anything we could try to do to help, we're here.